about session 4 discussion, where we're starting to look at versions. I am calling them here the edits that live forever because we're going to look at two different copies of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. In the discussion, where we start with our key questions, we read that Mary Shelley created an interesting and unique opening, as well as a complex narrative structure. You'll notice that there are letters within this. Analyze the structuring and writing of Frankenstein based on the following questions. So we have five full questions. You'll notice that the first and third match up. How does the original follow the rules of Edgerton's book? And how does the abridged and adapted version follow the rules? And then our second and fourth also line up. And how did that particular version break those rules? Finally, we're looking at what can we conclude about how expectations for fiction writing changed during the time between these two published versions. Notice that we're looking at 1831 for the original, and we're looking at 1986 for the new abridged copy. So here are two clips, two screenshots of the very opening of both. So this is a little bit different than the original, but it's how we can look at it in HTML on Project Gutenberg's website. The reason it's available is that it's over 100 years old, and that makes it out of copyright for this sort of use. So it's available for public use, but not for making money off of. So as you can see, it's a lot more dense. It does start by saying letter 1. It has the idea of who it is to and when it is written, and then it becomes very dense. But if we look at the abridged version, it's in italics, so it's in handwriting. We have a much clearer to so-and-so and what the date is. We have an address, so we have the honorific, we have dear sister. Then you'll notice that we have all these paragraphs stacking up just here on our very first page. Instead of having 2 paragraphs, we now have what? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're really breaking it up into more readable version pieces. And the other point we're going to be looking at is the language itself. So we start off by saying, what about this opening? What about this first page is following some of these rules? How is Mary Shelley hooking us into this work? And then we're going to ask that same question of the 1986 abridged and adapted version, because we want to start to say there's a reason here, right? There's something that's going on for people to have rewritten it, to have shared this new, quote unquote, new copy with us. So what's happening there? So first off, we're starting by just saying, how is there one particular rule perhaps that both have followed? Maybe there are more, but we're looking for at least one thing that they both catch, that they both sort of do in terms of being hooked. Then we're going to go do the opposite. Now that we know how they have sort of followed the rules, perhaps just a little bit, but it's in there somewhere. Now we're going to say, how do they break those rules? And I think this is where we're going to start to see how these two are different. They're going to follow and break the rules in slightly different ways. And then our final question is, how have things changed? So what does this really tell us? So I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the idea of abridgment, because these books are definitely out there, and they're often quick copies. So I have 2 ideas. One, we generally are arguing that we abridge for ease of reading. So we say, hey, we want kids to find it more interesting. We want to bring it up to sort of what the expectations are for, say, a 7th grade reading level. So we're going to edit how it's written so that it's using language that we would expect. So as you look at those 2 versions, do you start to see anything that would help you in terms of ease of reading? And that, of course, we are talking about language, but we're also talking about presentation and form. And next, we also abridge for a change in taste. This can go really far out there, and you will find edits in language, you will find scenes altered, and there are lots of really interesting, good discussions about this that I love to explore. I think there are good points on both sides for how to tackle ideas of taste, because that could just be whether or not we sort of enjoy it in modern society, but it can also dive into slurs and hate speech and graphic violence and graphic assault. So it can be more than just sort of, oh, let's make this sort of prettier. It can be, oh, that's a word we don't use anymore. And then there are great questions around, like, do we keep it because it's older? You can look at like Mark Twain and different people where they're asking, like, how are we doing this and why should or shouldn't we do that? So based on that idea, if it's for taste, how does that abridged version feel maybe different? Is it more appealing? Like, do you find yourself thinking that or not? Because sometimes those ideas of taste, that's subjective. And what about things like what we've already been working on? We see things with Lewis where we're already saying, oof, like maybe that wouldn't be the best opener. What about another 50 years from now? If we're looking back and back and back at Shelley's work, we're saying, oh, well, we wouldn't really say it that way now. But add another 100 years to Lewis, and will the same sorts of things be happening to him? Like, are we starting to see that? Are there things you enjoy that are starting to sort of show their age in that sense? So we are looking at the big idea of, yes, we're asking these questions about a story, but we're also saying that more than just us in our class are asking these questions. These are big questions about what great works of literature have happened to them. Looking up Mary Shelley and her writing of Frankenstein, it's essentially proto science fiction. It's the start of that, which we don't really see for another 100 or more years. We don't really see what we would call science fiction as a genre for quite some time and after that. So we're seeing things that are really different in the writing world. If you look at her relationship, she was married to Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was a romantic poet, and romantic poets were responding to the constraints of Victorian times and living it up and having a lot of really interesting and different adventures in life. But they all had a lot of really wild ideas for that time that aren't so wild now, and they were also pushing boundaries. And when we look at some sort of discussions about how Mary Shelley was edited by her husband, we get an idea of sexism and misogyny, of ideas of him sort of pushing for, in a sense, making her work worse so that she wouldn't come off quite as great as she is, because honestly, Frankenstein may be more well recognized than Shelley's work, although his writing of Ozymandias is one of my favorite poems in the entire world. But a lot of people aren't going to remember that when they will know of, at the very least, Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster and all these things. So explore those two ideas. Say, why are things changing? Do we like these ideas? Do they make sense? Could we see more of that in the future? Would we be open to that kind of thing with our work? Is it sort of like how what we write changes when it goes onto film or television or YouTube? So play with those ideas and hopefully have some fun as well.